Okay, it's Gordon Causey once again. I'm being joined today by Rick Thomas, all the way out in Vancouver, British Columbia. We're going to be talking about the situation that everyone's talking about in Israel, and there's been a lot of news in the last few days. We now have Spain, Norway, and Ireland recognizing or signaling that they are going to recognize the sovereign nation state of Palestine. We have the International Court of Justice putting out arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu, his war secretary, as well as leaders of Hamas. So, welcome, Rick. And if you want to tell anyone watching a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm a writer. Basically, I've written a pile of books on a couple nonfiction, or sorry, a couple fiction novels, and the rest are mostly nonfiction about mostly about politics and religion. So they're available on Amazon. I have a Substack, freepolitik.com. If we were see my pretty little sign. So that you can find a lot of my current uh, writings, and I have written quite a lot on the current conflict since October 7th.
Okay. And you and I are friends on Facebook, and we've been crossing swords, as it were, which is the way that's just the way social media operates.
Yes,
It's
but
type, it's text.
you're a nice guy, Gordon, and that's why we're having this conversation, because we've kept it civil, and I appreciate that because there's a lot of non-civil discussions on Facebook. So we can disagree, but we don't have to hate each other. So that I give you credit for that.
And you as well, because normally, it's that old line about can we do, people can't disagree anymore without being disagreeable. You and I are throwbacks to that day, to that time when you could disagree with someone, but
Right.
not hate on a person.
Sure.
Uh, Rick is very much pro. I would say, am I correct in framing you? I would call you pro-Palestinian. Is that fair?
Well, it's fair, sure. In this particular conflict, yes, there's sides here, and I support the Palestinian cause. So I'd have to qualify that to say that am I pro-Hamas? Not really, because Hamas is the government of Palestine. Like, do I support the government? Well, sure, whatever. Do I support all the violence? No, not really. Palestine has chosen the path of violence, so I don't think that's, I guess I'm a peacenik, a throwback, as you said. So I'm a bit of a peacenik. So no, I don't agree with that aspect of it, though I support the basic right of Palestinians to defend themselves because they're getting the short end of the stick here. They are a third world territory, not a nation state. Like as you mentioned, they're trying to achieve nation state status, but they are so far basically an occupied territory being managed by Israel.
Okay. So many different directions we can go in with this, because you and I have fundamental disagreements on Palestine and Israel, or and it's a difficult conversation to have. But I think the most pertinent, the most essential starting point for any conversation about what the context of what's happening right now is 1917 and the Balfour Declaration.
Right.
I look upon the British as having created this problem, so to speak. They created this issue. Up until 1917, the Ottomans had been ruling this area of the world, call it the Levant, call it Palestine, call it Canaan,
Sure.
call it whatever you want, but it was an Ottoman district, and the Ottomans had been ruling over Muslims, Christians, Jews, Druze, and likely some other, smaller, less significant groups as well. And everyone's living reasonably, the Ottomans ruled it for over, I think, over 400 years. I
Right.
think we're going back to the 14 or 1500s that the Ottomans ruled it. But then the Brits defeated the Ottomans, and then Great Britain took over not just the Levant, but they also took over Mesopotamia, which later became Iraq. They had their mandate for Mesopotamia, their mandate for Palestine. The
Mhm.
French were given a mandate over Lebanon, a mandate over Syria. We had the Sykes-Picot Agreement,
Mhm.
where they took former Ottoman territories and carved them up into areas of influence. And everyone living in Palestine, what was then determined to be Palestine, everyone was Palestinian, irrespective of whether they were Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Druze, or whatever. Everyone's a Palestinian because, and Palestine, starting in 1920, after the San Remo Conference, they established a mandate for Palestine, and it actually included all of present day Israel, including the occupied territories,
Mhm.
and all of present day Jordan. That was the original mandate for Palestine. Do you have any thoughts on that? The fact that Palestine, as it was established in 1920, that
Uh,
at this, go ahead.
uh, yeah, you're actually laying things out pretty good, and I would agree with you that a lot of the problems that we're having right now are the fault of the British Empire and the French. The Sykes-Picot sneaky secret deal betrayed the Arabs who they promised the Arab state, and they reneged on that promise and did a backdoor deal and came up with a whole new plan. Did they ever really intend to honor this promise to the Arabs? Maybe. Um, so the other share of the blame has to go to Israel. This was a deal they made. Um, okay, then you have to get into the real nitty-gritty of did Jewish European Jews have a right to return? Now, this is, going back to the Zionist project, which was largely uh, initiated by Moses Hess and Theodore Herzl, the two main proponents of it, of course, with the support of a lot of European Jews, European
The
aristocracy.
Rothschilds.
The Rothschilds, the key signature to the Balfour Declaration was Walter Rothschild, among others. Arthur Milner has been credited by Carol Quigley, who wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope, if you're familiar with that book. Okay, so it's about the Anglo-American establishment, and he basically said Arthur Milner was the guy who wrote the Balfour Declaration.
Okay.
And okay, well, who's Arthur? Arthur Milner was part of the Round Table group, which was Cecil Rhodes in Rhodesia, now South Africa. He was part of this apartheid state, creator of apartheid state of a white supremacist British exceptionalism. So, in my opinion, it's unsurprising that he would be the author of this document, which would create another apartheid state in Israel. Now, you might disagree with that term, apartheid.
Well, when I look at the history of what happened, when I walk through the history, I mean, the situation we're confronting in 2024 is not the situation that it was in 1947 or 1948. We have to go back. You said that the British had reneged on their promises to the Arab world to create a Palestinian nation state. But in
Well,
point of fact, I would argue that they did create a
well,
Palestinian.
the deal wasn't to create a Palestinian state. The deal was to create an Arab state with the
Right,
Hashemite
right,
dynasty.
and they did,
Arabs and Palestinians are not the same.
right.
Right.
The Hashemites were granted Transjordan,
Well,
and they were also given rule over Mesopotamia, which became Iraq. They had rule over it for a time. And the British also stepped on the feet of the British by giving the Hashemites rule over the French mandate of Syria, but the French kicked the Hashemites out because they said this is our mandate, not part of the British mandate. It's not a British mandate. You're overstepping your authority, so to speak. So there was an Arab state. Your point is well made that it's not a Palestinian state. It was Arabs ruling the Palestinian territory that was given to the Hashemites, and they just gave it the name Transjordan. Later, it became Jordan in 1946.
Right.
And they gained
Which is
full
now a
autonomy.
client state of the American Empire.
Basically,
Yes.
although at that time they were a protectorate when they were created in 1921, 1 year after the establishment of the Palestinian Mandate. When the Hashemites were given Transjordan, it was a protectorate of Great Britain.
Right. So you know,
And as time progressed, sounded like you were going to say something.
yeah, I was just going to say, okay, so 1917, why did the British agree to this? Why did the uh, Israeli aristocracy, what's the deal? It's like nothing's for free. You don't just give somebody a country and just say, here you go. That's not how the world works. There was a deal made. I can give you my opinion what the deal was. The deal was basically, first of all, the British needed Jewish support. One, financial support. They needed the money, the Rothschild piggy bank, and the Hirsch family were also involved. They also needed an outpost that were now managing this Ottoman Empire, but how are they going to manage it? Well, you can't just send some cables, telegrams from Britain and expect the area to behave. So they needed a military outpost. So this was the deal: was the Jews were to eventually take over, provide security. So initially, it was the British Empire who were providing security for the colonists, who slowly started moving in. The Rothschild family started buying up land, and then we had colonists coming from Eastern Europe, mostly. A
Some
lot.
Americans, some
Yeah, some
Australians.
Americans, all over Europe primarily, who
Yep.
started moving in and establishing colonies protected by the British. And then over time, we're talking decades, uh, uh, the newly formed Israeli nation or pre-nation developed a military and started to protect itself and encroach upon their neighbors, which culminated in the 1948 big war between all their neighbors, and which Israel won.
Well,
So,
they didn't win everything. I mean, I think it's important to, there's a tendency to think that Israel won the war. Egypt managed to capture the Gaza Strip, and they didn't create a Palestinian state. They said, this is ours now. This is part of Egypt. So the
mhm.
people living in Gaza are are part, they're subject to the Egyptian nation.
Okay, good point. Yeah.
And likewise, Jordan, which had become Jordan in 1946, they captured the West Bank,
Mhm.
and they didn't. And if you look at the Palestinian flag and the Jordanian flag, it's the same flag with just the star and the triangle has been removed.
Well,
Now,
that's the Arabic colors, the
yes,
red, white,
well,
and green are the, you know, colors all over the Arab world.
but it's a carbon copy. The Jordanian flag and the uh,
Palestinian flag.
Palestinian flag are carbon copies, save for one small element, which is a sun or a star, a golden star in the middle of
Okay.
the triangle. And Jordan also captured East Jerusalem.
Mhm.
And there's wide reporting, multiple sources that you can view on the internet of a Jordanian commander bragging over the fact that for the first time in 1,000 years, there are no Jews in the eastern quarter of Jerusalem. We've ethnically cleansed it.
Mhm.
you know, and they ethnically cleansed the West Bank of its Jewish population. Some of those people, some of whom had been there for centuries, going back 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, the Jewish population in Palestine, call it whatever you want, had waxed and waned over the centuries. Sometimes it got under 10,000, sometimes it would go up to 100,000. It waxed and waned, but there had always been a Jewish presence in
And
the land.
yes, and there'd always been a Palestinian presence and a Christian presence and an Arab
And a Druze
and
and
Drew's
everything else.
presence. So now you have to get back again to the right of return. Does the land belong to Israel? Did they have a legal right to return? And I would say no. There's no international law that says you can move back into your old neighborhood. Uh, so there isn't. And the majority of the population at the time of 1917 were Palestinians. 700,000, depending on
Well,
source.
everyone living in the area, I think we have to make the distinction, because everyone living in the area, regardless of their ethnicity or their religion, everyone's Palestinian.
Okay,
When
well,
they,
let's say Palestinian Muslims then.
okay,
Yes,
I
so
think that's an important distinction to make, because everyone living in it when it was Ottoman ruled Syria, which is what it was called, it was part of the Syrian province under the Ottomans.
right.
And so you're subject to the Ottoman Empire, regardless of whether you're Jewish,
Right.
Muslim, Christian, whatever.
Well, do the Canaanites have a right to go back and kick the Jews out because it was originally Canaan? So do the ancestors of the Canaanites suddenly get to come forward and say, no, actually, this is our land. We were here first. We've always been here. And Israel, you got to bugger off because, God says it's ours. So, I think things just get all kind of fuzzy when you say, whose land is Canada? Does it belong to Inuit, First Nations?
We
Does it belong to
I
the
mean, I think
French?
I can answer it in
The
terms
French
of
were here first.
the United States and Canada, or the Australians. We can all say that we all occupy stolen land. That's human history going back thousands of years.
Right.
Everyone steals everyone else's
Yeah. Well,
land.
whose land did it belong to before the American First Nations people came over the Bering Strait land bridge from Asia? So why don't they all go back to their land in Asia?
We're all immigrants
We're
at the
all
end of the day.
immigrants. This is the fundamental fact of human history is nobody's living where, with some
Well,
few exceptions, everybody's come from somewhere else.
if you go back to the core of anthropology, I think it says that there's a great rift valley in Africa from whence all of humanity came out of this valley in Africa somewhere, this Rift
Well, yeah,
Valley.
well, that's one
So if
theory.
you're living there,
We, we all got to go back to Africa, to our roots.
yeah.
Kuna Matata, brother.
But at any rate, let's fast forward. Okay, so we get to 1948,
Yeah,
and the status quo in 1948
right.
is it is still British mandated Palestine.
Hmm.
70% of the original mandate had already been carved out way back in 1921. So Jordan's been established.
Hmm.
What exists now is the remaining 23% of the original Palestinian mandate, what we call Israel today, including the occupied territories. That's the remaining part, and it's still under British rule, British authority. However, Britain has announced to the world on May 15th, we're done, we're out of here. We're no longer going to be administering this territory. This will be like an internationally unrecognized, it's a free for all.
Hmm.
It's open land.
Right.
And living in this territory that is still called Palestine, there are, from everything I've read, around 750, maybe 800,000 Jews, men, women, and children.
Mm.
And the numbers I've heard for what we'll now differentiate, call them Palestinians, um, around 1.2 million.
Hmm.
Does that line up with your
Yeah,
reading
somewhere
history?
somewhere in there, and then there was a big expulsion, and about 800,000 Palestinians were booted out and have remained refugees. And
Some fled ahead of the war. Everyone knew the war was coming.
right, so some left voluntarily, some were forced out, but either way, there was a mass refugee
Exodus.
ex exodus out of the area. The first Nakba, as it's called, and the Palestinians are calling what's happening now as Nakba 2.0, is that there's
Well,
what's happening now is a forced expulsion of Gaza. And in my opinion, there won't be anybody left in Gaza within 6 months. It's going to be vacated. The Israels will bomb and then bulldoze the whole thing into the sea and start their new project, which they've been planning for quite a long time. They've already, Netanyahu has already made deals with the French and the Germans to invest billions of dollars into the rebuilding of Gaza, and it will be annexed, and that's what's going to happen. And I don't see, unless there's massive intervention by, Hezbollah, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. So far that hasn't happened. There's been skirmishes and some love taps, but Hezbollah has not unloaded their stockpile. They got 150,000 missiles, and
200,000,
they're
huge
not
amount.
unloading them all. It's all just saber rattling and back and forth. Yeah, they're bombing each other, and Israel's been hitting airstrikes in Syria and southern Lebanon, but this is not full-scale war by any means. And
No.
so I don't know. It
But
doesn't.
walking through the history, so we have 1948 on May 14th,
Okay.
the day before the British mandate expires,
Right.
and they're due to vacate and to leave the territory basically rulerless without any nation state.
Mm-hmm.
And as we said, at this point, I have a friend, George Antonios, Dr. George Antonios. His PhD is in theology,
Mm-hmm.
and he's from Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
And his maternal grandmother was born in Bethlehem. She was not Muslim and not Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So he said she was probably a Canaanite.
Mm-hmm.
And they were told, her family was told, to vacate, leave, because we're going to wipe the Jews out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll be able to return,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll have increased land holdings because all the Jews will be gone. So
Mm-hmm.
the family fled to Lebanon, and that's where George eventually was born many years later.
Mm-hmm.
And so now 1948, May 14th, the Zionists declare the unilateral declaration of independence for the nation state of Israel. They adopted the map and their boundaries as being what the UN had proposed, what the Zionists had accepted, what the Arabs had rejected. They adopted that, but it was pointless because immediately on May 15th, the very next day, 5 nations of the Arab League, not Palestinians, 5 nations of the Arab League, Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, which is somewhat, it was Palestine too, and Saudi Arabia, all invaded.
Now, what, in your opinion, is the motivation behind this? Why, from the beginning?
Why did they
Well,
invade?
going back to 1917, the collective Arab community did not like the Balfour Declaration at all.
No.
They did not like the intention of it. They did not want Israel in Palestine. They didn't want the Jews
Right.
there. They resisted
They
this.
didn't want a Jewish nation state existing on what had been formerly Arab territory.
Right. So do they have a right not to want Israel there?
Well, you know what? Whether they have the right or not is irrelevant to me,
Right.
because what happened is what happens so often throughout human history. A
Right.
war ensued. We have conflicting ideologies.
Yes.
Who's got the correct ideology? I'm not going to
Well,
arbitrate.
now, come on, Gordon. We've had this discussion before. I'm pretty confident in saying I know which ideology you think is correct. So that wouldn't be a fair statement for you to make if or
Well, what I tend to do is I tend to basically, I have my religious views, my faith-based views.
right.
And in this world that we live in that is so secular,
Yes.
I am capable of taking my faith-based views and putting them aside and saying, look, I'll leave my faith aside and just deal in what I will call, for lack of a better word, the real world. I'll deal
Sure.
in the real world, and I'll leave faith aside
Okay.
and
But
just treat this as if it's Ukraine and Russia or Taiwan and China or
okay, then explain to me. Uh, no, you at the beginning of our conversation, you asked me, from my point of view, am I pro-Palestinian? And so,
yes.
yes. So, are you pro-Israel, pro-Israeli?
Yes, I am
Okay, so
pro-Israel
why uh, are you pro-Israel?
because they won the war.
Okay, so your reasons are purely strategic, really. Uh,
The point I'm getting at is in 1948, five nations of the Arab League
right.
invaded. What was their ultimate goal? I think we can see their ultimate goal by what happened after the war ended in 1949. Did Egypt work towards the creation of a Palestinian state? No, the territory that they captured, the Gaza Strip, they said, that's ours.
Mhm.
Jordan, do they want to create a Palestinian, autonomous Palestinian nation state? No, they captured the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and they said, that's our territory. They didn't create an autonomous Palestinian state. They just swallowed up.
Right.
And
Okay.
had the ultimate goal been achieved
Mhm.
and the Jews been completely defeated, they
Mhm.
were defeated in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, and in Gaza. The Jews managed, the Zionist forces managed to win the remainder the of the what remained of the Palestinian mandate. They got the remainder, and they changed it from Palestine and they called it Israel. But if Jordan and Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and Saudi had managed to achieve their goal and to defeat the Zionist forces, I don't think you'd see a Palestine today. I think there very well could have been a war between those five nations over who gets what.
That's a possibility. So, what do you think is so
Who
special?
gets to rule the Palestinians?
Yes,
So
and
the,
why is there so much interest in this piece of property?
that is such a huge question, and I've asked so many people. I asked Dr. George Antonios this question:
Yeah.
what is so darn special geopolitically, which is your
Well,
bailiwick?
that's my um
it's
forte, I
it's the
guess, is geopolitics. So, uh
it's the nexus of three continents.
yes,
It's the linchpin between Africa, Asia, and Europe.
right.
It's a
Well, the same,
gateway.
we're looking at a repeat of history going back to the Roman Empire. Why did the Roman Empire occupy Judea and Galilee, this whole region? What
And
did they
before that, the Greeks, and before that, the
fighting over
Babel.
this region? Because, as you said, it's the hub or the linchpin of the whole region. North, it's the trade hub of the terminus of the Silk Roads in the time of the Roman Empire ended on
Right.
the Mediterranean. They needed a port on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, and it's the crossroads between Africa and Europe. All the trade traffic went right through that whole region, and the Roman Empire occupied the region for those reasons. Plus, in the south, the Ptolemaic Egyptian dynasty, the Alexandrian Greek Egyptian dynasty, they had to keep them away from the Seleucids in Syria. So to keep the two of them from coming together and forming an alliance, which would have been a nightmare for the Roman Empire. At the time previous to the arrival of Jesus of Nazareth on the scene, the Augustus in a few 3 decades before had made a peace agreement with the Parthians, Persian Empire in the east. So they had put that problem aside, and they were still left with these two empires to the south and the north. So they needed a buffer state to keep them separate and to keep it and to protect the region. The Jews at the time were in an enviable position, which they did not recognize or acknowledge due to their racial ideas of what we would call today Zionism. But Zionism isn't new. Zionism existed going back, you can go back in the book of Psalms to the psalm about, our captors asked us to sing the songs of Zion, but we hung our harps upon the trees. How could we sing these songs when we were under
In a strange
captivity
land.
in a strange land?
That's the Boney M song, By the Rivers of Babylon, where we
Yes,
sat down. Hail,
yes,
hail, we well.
yes.
We
So,
wept.
so they wept and mourned over the loss of their Holy Land.
Yep.
Now, it's not the first time that happened. The Jews have a repeated history of getting booted out, captivity back and forth. And so we're seeing a repeat of that. So getting back to geopolitics.
If I could just
Sure.
bookmark this, I'm going to remember getting back to geopolitics, but I want to make just one point, and I think it's significant. How many times have the Jews been exiled out of this land?
Well,
The Assyrians, there when they conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in the 700s BC,
hmm.
there was an occupation of Galilee and what was the area around what was the northern kingdom of Israel, and there was an expulsion. And these are the lost 10 tribes. They got lost to the sands of time, and we don't know what happened to them.
Well, that's also, biblical mythology. There's no evidence there were 10 tribes. There's only evidence there were two, which was the northern and southern kingdom of Judea and Israel. There's no evidence of these 10 tribes ever existed. There's no archaeological evidence. So this can be, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't.
Okay, don't
That's another issue altogether.
you're betraying a bias when you refer to it as mythology.
Well, there's
Because
no evidence. If there's no evidence, then it has to be
that
put on
just
the shelf.
because something isn't absence of evidence
Evidence
doesn't
doesn't
mean
prove it didn't happen, but
right.
my own that's another can of worms there, but
Oh, huge can of worms.
huge can of worms. But basically, over time, I have tried to base my knowledge on the things I know, and
Okay,
not on the things I don't know or can't prove or confirm.
okay,
So I can confirm through history that there was a Judea and Israel. So I can't confirm a lot of things in the Bible have been confirmed by
tons.
archaeology. Lots. There's a lot
Yep.
of history in there. There is some that has not been confirmed. So does that mean that just because you haven't got evidence again doesn't mean it didn't happen? It's just we just haven't
Found
yet
the evidence yet.
yet
Or
there's been a lot of evidence come out over the last 100+ years to support a lot of the narrative in the Bible. So as far as that goes, so back to geopolitics.
yes,
So that we're in the same boat today. The British Empire needed the region for trade purposes, and they needed a military outpost. American commentators, even Kennedy recently said that Israel's the biggest aircraft carrier base in the region. Others have called it that. It's nothing new. So that's the purpose, the deal that Israel made with the British, which was the baton was passed on to the Americans, that Israel would provide military defense for the region to keep the trade going. So, having said that, the Han Dynasty, the Augustus initiated the Pax Romana, which lasted till about 180 A.D. All this road building, Israel had really subdued and conquered all their major threats. The the Han Dynasty had made a deal with the Persians from the east, and the Augustus created peace between the western half with the Parthians, which allowed trade to go all the way through the Silk Road. So we had about 200 uninterrupted years of relative peace. So this same repeated thing is happening with the Chinese New Silk Roads project, which is going to hook up to the Mediterranean, just as it did during the time of Jesus. The Red Med project, as it's called, the Red Sea Mediterranean project, is one of them. China's got Israel is a key node in the Silk Roads project, and of course, because geography doesn't change. It's
No,
the same geography. The inhabitants change, but the geography doesn't change. So, as far as Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, all wanting a piece of pie, yes, of course, they would be naive to think that these players are innocent, that they don't know why this region is significant. Of course, they would want it, and of course they would fight over it, because whoever has control of the region, Palestine, Israel region, has enormous control on the world stage. Like, you just can't understate how much significance this little territory has. So there we have it. In order for all these future plans of Israel and the West to go through, which is one is the Ben Gurion Canal project. Israel has long-term plans to
that's
run
been
a
around,
canal,
since the 60s.
yeah, up the Red Sea, and then west right through to the port. And the port would be, coincidentally, either Gaza or north of Gaza, and then they would have two lanes. See, the Suez Canal only allows one lane at a time, not that wide, but they have plans to allow back and forth traffic, which would basically double the amount of traffic that go through there, which would give Israel and the collective West whole of that trade region without having to rely on Egypt. And
Suez Canal.
so there's that. The other project, of course, is the gas and oil off the shore of Gaza, which there's at least $3-4 billion worth of natural gas, which belongs to the Palestinians, assuming there are Palestinians. If there's no Palestinians there, it doesn't belong to them. Israel has already sent out tendered contracts to 12 different oil companies. They're already planning on
Exploiting
drilling,
that resource.
exploiting that resource. So I don't find the losers of this big game of chess are the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank.
I think the losers on both sides are the Palestinians living in Gaza and the West Bank,
Yeah.
and the Joe Jane Israeli citizen, or Moishe and Rachel Jewish Israelis who are living in wherever they, Tel Aviv or wherever they happen to be living in Israel. Is most people just want to live their lives, but we have political ideologies on both sides driving the bus and trying, and it's just come out now. I mentioned it off the hop. We have Spain, Norway, and Ireland, who are all signaling that in the coming days they're going to recognize formal recognition of a Palestinian state, which geographically I assume would include Gaza and the West Bank.
Or what's left of it.
Right. And that these are Palestinian, this is this new nation of Palestine that they're recognizing. And personally, I don't think a two-state solution is workable.
No,
when you
it
have,
hasn't worked so far.
well, there's never been a formally autonomous Palestinian state out of what remained of the British mandate. There's been one nation, Israel, and up until 1967, Gaza was part of Egypt and the West Bank was part of Jordan. It was only that 1967 war that basically created Palestine, because everyone living in Jordan maintained its claim on the West Bank right up until 1988. On July 30th, 1988, Jordan formally relinquished and said, we no longer are laying claim to this territory as part of Jordan. They said, we're done. And there were Palestinians who said that, well, individuals living in the West Bank, they said, I went to bed on July 30th and I was Jordanian. When I woke up in the morning, I was Palestinian, and someone took the star off my flag.
Right.
Now suddenly we have the birth of Palestine. And the same thing in 1967 in Gaza. It used to be Egyptian. Now, so it's only 1967. So for the last 50 odd years, coming up on 50 years that we have, 50 plus years that we have this Palestinian state. Mm-hmm. And they are not they have never accepted the war that the humiliating defeat of 1948, 1949, when 800,000 at most Jewish men, women, and children managed to establish themselves against 5 invading nations with populations over 30 million.
Right.
The Jews should not have won that war.
No, they shouldn't have. The Arabs should have kicked their ass.
Yeah, and they didn't.
They didn't. So for a variety of reasons, incompetence, they didn't
lack of coordination.
Lack of coordination. They're all just ran in there without a plan. We're just, it definitely.
I think the reason for it, a big part of the reason was it was a land grab. They were all thinking they would run over the Jews and everyone would take a piece.
Right. They'd get their piece of the pie and whatever they could get, because it was all up for grabs. And so that's what happened, as you mentioned.
And the Jewish people,
Jordan got a piece, and
the Zionists got a piece.
Right.
And the Arab world has never been able to reconcile itself to the fact that the Zionists managed to capture a piece. And they've been trying to wipe them out ever since 1967, 1973, Intifada, Intifada, Intifada. They're constantly trying to wipe them out.
Do they have a right? Do they have a right to wipe them out? I mean,
does the Arab world have a right to wipe them out?
Yeah, the Israel's one of their main is the right to exist. You've got to recognize our right to exist. This is a very thorny issue, a foreign policy issue for Israel. The right to exist.
If the Arab world has the right to try and wipe Israel out from the river to the sea,
yes.
If the Arab world has that right, well, then certainly the Jewish people have the right to defend themselves. Would you not agree?
Well, yes and no. The rights have to go both ways. Like, so if you say that Palestine has a right to exist, if you say that Israel has a right to exist, then according to law, international law, they have a right to go to war with each other. There's rules here. The Hamas, according to international law, an occupied territory, the inhabitants of an occupied territory have the right to defend themselves and resist, or according to international law.
Right. And that
includes taking up arms. So Hamas, in international law, Hamas's revolt on October 7th was legal.
Well, okay, you've had Intifada, Intifada, Intifada. You've had all these uprising rockets, and Israel has the right to defend itself. And so to defend itself, it puts up a concrete border fence, call it a security fence, call it an open-air prison, in order to ensure the safety of their citizens against attack. They establish checkpoints, and I agree, these checkpoints are horrible because
they've created their own.
A resident of Gaza can't find work in his own territory, in his own the country in Gaza, can't find work, and so he is willing to go and work inside of Israel.
So he wants to feed his family.
Right.
there's a blockade out in the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. Nothing gets in or out of Gaza unless Israel.
except for rockets,
Well,
except
okay,
for,
we're talking rockets. So let's take a look at the military strength of Israel versus Gaza. Now you're talking about Israel, which is a first world nation with
yep,
sophisticated, high-tech weaponry, with the backing of United States and by extension NATO, the most powerful military force in the world.
yep,
And Gaza is a third world territory fighting with homemade rockets made out of plumbing pipe and RPGs that look like they came out of the Korean War. I've seen the video, and these things are not even new weapons wherever they got them. Iran didn't give them the good shit. They gave them their old junk they didn't need. So they're not the Hamas, and it's not Hamas fighting the IDF. It's the brigades. Hamas, the government, it's not fighting
oh,
anybody. It's the
right,
brigades. These are militias of young Palestinian Gazans who
primarily men.
they don't have uniforms or insignias. They're wearing slippers and tennis shoes, running around, leaping in and out of these tunnels. Uh,
This $1 billion tunnel network, because
well, yeah,
Palestine, they did
billion
receive,
dollar tunnel network. These tunnels did not cost billions of dollars. A
sure they
subway,
did. They got reinforced concrete down there. This
anybody
is,
can put reinforced concrete, so they were built by hand. It's not like they had tunnel machines down there like we have here in Vancouver. We're building the SkyTrain. This is a multi-billion-dollar project with tunnel machines. These are dug by hand, right? This is
they
sweat.
are
This
everything
is
I'm reading calls them a marvel of engineering, given the level of technology that they have access to.
Well, yeah, given the level of technology and funding, there's no way it costs them billions of dollars to dig these
The amount
tunnels.
of money that has poured into Gaza from international aid organizations over the years,
Where does that money go? It goes to Israel first.
and
Israel
it goes to
manages,
Hamas and it goes to Qatar.
no, it goes to Israel. Israel manages the electricity, the water, the customs, everything in and out of the trucks are parked at the Rafah crossing are not getting in. The aid's
No,
not getting in because Israel's not letting them in. They used to get
and
500 trucks.
Egypt has recently been accused of also blockading supply trucks from their side of the border,
Okay, so why,
which is interesting.
it's interesting because whose side is Egypt on?
That's a good question.
Who's is Egypt a client state of the United America? What game are they playing? They've Israel offered Egypt to pay off their national debt in order to take 2 million Palestinian refugees.
Yeah.
So far,
When the Camp David peace accords were signed, on top, because in that 1967 war, not only did Israel capture Gaza, they also captured the Sinai Peninsula. And in the 1978 or 1979 Camp David peace agreement, they traded land for peace. Egypt recognized Israel's right to exist,
right?
and Israel gave them back the Sinai Peninsula. But Israel also offered them back the Gaza Strip, and the Egyptians under Anwar Sadat said, "Nah, we don't want them. We don't want. It's not the territory. It was the population of Gaza that was seen as harboring too many extremists who would destabilize Egyptian politics,
Right.
because the Muslim Brotherhood, which was somewhat the forerunner to Hamas, were seen as being too present in Gaza.
Mhm.
And so the Anwar Sadat said no. And then, but he did accept Sinai, and they made the land for peace agreement. And then Sadat was murdered,
Fascinated.
assassinated, murdered. And likewise, I mean, it strikes me, and it's on both sides of the equation. When Yitzhak Rabin in 1992, 93, 94, I forget the exact year, when they signed the Oslo Accords, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated
Mhm.
because that was creating a path forward toward Palestinian statehood.
Mhm. So
The
I'm
the
agreeing with you on uh, uh, everything you're saying. So I think what's really happening on the world stage is that Gaza is a sacrificial pawn. That in order for all these projects to go through, in order for the world to have its trade continue on, and the big players to keep the money flowing, that something has to go, and it has to be Gaza, and next will be the West Bank. So the Arab population, they're not all united. Of course, half of the Arab world are American client states like Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. Uh, and so they're even within the Arab world, there's massive division. They're not a big blob, and they're not coming together. Erdogan, put on a big show of supporting the Palestinians, but he's not doing nothing. It's
how
just
much of
all
it is,
show.
how much of that is politics to placate his Turkish
His base,
population?
keep them, oh, we're gonna fight the Western, jihad, yeah, 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 but nothing's happened. Um, so there's a failure of initiative here on the side of the Arab world. None of them really want to really go all in because they don't want a third world war. Some of them do, but some of them don't. If they did, Hezbollah would have unloaded uh, it's sorry.
That's okay.
Hezbollah would have unloaded its stockpile of weapons long ago. Syria, Yemen talks a lot. Oh, we're gonna send 400,000 troops in invasion, but other than capturing a few ships and lobbing a couple cruise missiles, they haven't done anything either. So you know, things are what they are. Yeah, will this lead to the Third World War? It's very possible that I've written a couple articles that this is setting the stage, a three-stage progression, escalation of violence is going to lead to the Third World War. Will that happen?
Yeah,
I don't have a crystal ball. I'm just saying that's what it looks like. So, in my opinion,
it looks to me, I'm in agreement with you. I think in retrospect, we may look back and say that October 7th was
the
I don't
beginning
think there's
of
going to,
World War III, it might
I
be
don't think if World War III happens, there's all of a sudden going to be someone dropping a flag and going, okay, everyone start now. It's going to be,
a long, slow, gradual war of attrition. And the reason for that is because the stakes are so incredibly high now, unlike the First and Second World War. The First World War caught the world by surprise. Uh,
you
you
think
know,
so?
oh, absolutely. The the
They had
1900s.
been built, the European empirical, the empires of the world had been building up their militaries prior to
Yes,
1914
yes,
in
this is true.
anticipation.
Well, okay. So if you take a look at the 1900, the Paris Exposition, it was
Yes,
called the Age of Hope. The whole European continent and North America were all gaga with all this new technology. They had escalators at the Paris, this sidewalk that went all over.
right.
There was new trains and first audio recorder. There was all kinds of we had flight on
On
the
the horizon.
on the horizon. So previous to World War One, there were no borders in Europe or almost anywhere in the world. There was no customs. Nobody had passports. You had documents to prove you were a citizen of here or there, but that was about it.
Right.
All this science and technology has given us the surveillance state, which happened after the beginnings of it happened after World War One. The World War One was called the war to end all
And all wars.
wars. They
Yeah. The
thought that
Great
was it.
War, the end of empire.
Yeah, that this war was so bad it was going to be the last war, but how totally wrong they were. It only set the stage for World War II, which the Treaty of Versailles, which I know you're sure you're quite aware of, and the agreements that were made after the Second World War, which part of that is the partitioning
situation in Israel.
situation in Israel is the precursor for World War III. It's all there. There's no international agreements that have been established that would prevent World War III. There was no reconciliation on sides. The World War II led almost immediately into the Cold War. First, the Americans were fighting their enemy fascism, and then suddenly now they're fighting communism. So there's
They were
nothing.
allied with,
Yes,
during World War II, they allied with communists, with communist Soviet, the
China,
Soviet Union.
communist, Soviet Union, and then immediately switched allegiances.
Well,
Um,
it's like 1984 when you're George Orwell's seminal book,
right.
where you have the Western world is called Oceania, and
Yes.
then there are two
You're right.
other, there's Eurasia and East Asia,
Yes.
and we're always at war with one and allied with another.
Right.
And you have this, and I look upon that, and I look upon the Islamic world. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, the United States cozied up to the Islamic world, and
Yes.
you had the creation of Al Qaeda and the Taliban, because
Right.
they were forces that could oust the Russians out of Afghanistan.
Right. And then they switched sides, and same with Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War. Is Americans funded and supported Saddam Hussein, and then he wasn't no longer useful, and so they had to have a reason to go in. The Muslim world became the new enemy after the Cold War expired in 1991. And, there's documents, Project for a New American Century, that
PNAC.
talk about the American need for a new enemy, and they found the most obvious one, which was Islam, which
Yep.
fits
And
into their Christian nationalist base on the Republican side of the
yep.
party, who view Islam as its main competitor on the world stage. The religious right in United States, uh, uh, see themselves in the context of a global exceptionalism based on end times prophecies. These end times prophecies, my friend, have to be fulfilled. They have to be fulfilled. And that's not just Christian end times prophecies, it's also Jewish end times prophecies and Muslim end times prophecies. They all have to be fulfilled. So how this will all play out, I don't know. I don't have a magic ball, but it's not going to be good.
Well,
The
I tend, when it comes to eschatology, and I stick to Christian eschatology and Jewish to it, obviously, because Judaism is the mother religion of Christianity
and Islam.
and Islam as well.
Yes.
However, I see Judaism is the mother religion, and that Christianity is a natural progression out of it. And I see Islam having come along in the 600s, 700s as having borrowed from each.
Yes.
Uh, Muhammad started a new religion. He borrowed elements of Judaism. He borrowed elements of Christianity. He was exposed to both communities on the
Yes.
Arabian Peninsula. And so
Absolutely.
he took elements of both. He said, Jews, you pray 3 times a day. Well, we pray 5 times a
I
day.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jews,
Trump you
you
then.
bow your head. Jews, you bow your head when you pray, and you Christians bow your head. Hey, we put our head right on the ground. We go
Right.
right, we're
Holier
big.
than thou.
That's right. He said, Jews, you circumcise your male children on the 8th day. Well, we follow the tradition of Ismail, and it's done when you're 13 years of age. You don't even remember your circumcision. I got mine at 13 years of age. You can bet your sweet Bibby, I remember it.
Mm.
There's an old expression, bet your sweet Bibby. That's
That was
oh, man.
talking about your junk, apparently.
Yeah. Oh man. But I have a question for you. We got to wrap this up, but I have a
Okay.
question for you going away from the Israel Palestinian conflict. And this is with respect to World War I. And I've come to this view organically. I haven't read it anywhere, but I have to assume others have had this thought as well. 1914, 1910, 11, 12, 13, the years leading up. Oil is becoming an increasingly important world resource.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Ships, planes, and everything else. And where are most of the world's proven reserves? They're in the Middle East.
Mhm.
At the time of World War I, there was actually a glut of oil on the world market. They produced more than was needed. There was a surplus of oil in the world
Yeah.
because we didn't have the cars and the planes and
Yeah,
everything
it
that
was
we
a
need.
lot easier to get. You could just drill
Right.
drill a hole in the ground and up came the bubbling crude.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Uh,
not so easy now.
right. So when I look at the war that took place, World War One, the war to end all wars, the end of empire, the Great War. When I look at World War One, I think that at least part of the rationale for that conflict was the desire of Western powers, Britain, France, and then later the United States joining in to gain control over this vital commodity that was going to be so important in the years ahead. It wasn't so important in 1914, but it
But by
was
the Second World War, it was absolutely,
hugely important.
yeah, the Germans had to have Romania because that was the Romanian oil fields, or they would have been in big trouble.
Yeah, and I look and I see, the Ottoman Empire was looking for a dance partner. They knew the war was coming up, but Britain and France wanted nothing to do with the Ottomans.
Mhm.
The Western powers wanted nothing to do with allying themselves with the Ottomans. The Ottomans were making overtures to the Western powers to ally with them, and they were left to choose between the Russian Empire in the days before the Bolshevik Revolution, when it was still Tsarist Russia, and they saw that the Tsarist Russia was collapsing, so they didn't want to go get into bed with them, and so that left them default. They had to default to the Austrian-Hungarian, the German Empire, the Germans, and now that's exactly what the West wanted. Now we can go in and we can take over this region and we'll have control over all the oil. And Britain, being the more powerful, France got run over in World War One. Britain was the kingmaker. And so they came in, they said, we get Mesopotamia. You can have Syria, you can have Lebanon to France, you can have North Africa, but we get the oil producing regions. We get Mesopotamia, which is where Iraq is. I
Right.
mean,
So yeah, the Sykes-Picot Agreement split up the oil fields.
right. With the English getting the proven oil reserves
Yes, they
and the
got the better
French getting,
part of the deal.
yeah, and the French got North Africa, they got Algeria, they got,
Right. It's
anyway. Do you
uh
have any closing thoughts?
well, this is really such a huge discussion. We only touched surfacely. There's much more involved here. So I don't think there's any way to understand what's happening in Gaza without understanding end times prophecy of all three Abrahamic religions. And to not delve into that, I think would be is missing a lot of what's happening. So that could be another discussion, is what I'm saying, because I think it's very important.
I don't know if you have time. I'm not averse.
Um,
I'm not averse to going into it.
oh, well, if you've got time, or we could do it, tomorrow, or,
Why don't we put this on part two
or,
tomorrow, end times,
yeah, sure.
as
Let's do that tomorrow, because I do have some other stuff I've got to do. So let's meet again tomorrow, Gordon, and I'm just going to end the recording for now.